Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News, India's voice to the world. I'm Tanvi Taneja. Coming up in the next hour. IMF revises India's GDP growth forecast upwards to 6.6% from 6.4% for the year 2025-26, despite Trump's tariff pressure, the highest in emerging market and developing economies. US government shutdown enters its third week as Senate rejects Republican funding bill for the 8th time. US Fed chair flags concern about sharp slowdown in job creation. 608 trucks to enter Gaza today with key Rafah crossing set to reopen. Bodies of 4 more Israeli hostages returned by Hamas. And tested by Russia, NATO looks to strengthen its defences. Secretary General Mark Rutte says the alliance and EU working together on a drone wall to protect Europe. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, in its latest report has risen India's GDP growth forecast for 2025-26 to 6.6% from 6.4% in its previous economic outlook. The October outlook increased India's growth projections by 20 basis points, reflecting a strong first quarter carryover. The IMF has highlighted that India has recorded the strongest upside surprise among all emerging market and developing economies. The World Economic Outlook was released as the annual meeting of the IMF and World Bank in Washington on Tuesday. IMF chief economist highlighted tariffs and trade tensions as 2 of the leading sources of global uncertainty for the world's economies.
Yet, despite all these offsets, the tariff shock is here, and it is further dimming already weak growth prospects. We have in our report a downside scenario. These are not these very specific details of what is being considered right now, but it illustrates the potential for the global economy to take a turn for the worse if trade tensions become more elevated.
On to the US. The government shutdown in the US entered its third week as a Senate vote to move forward on the House-passed bill to fund the government again failed on Tuesday. The US Senate on Tuesday rejected a potential funding deal for the 8th time, guaranteeing that the government shutdown that has caused disruptions in services across the country will continue. The Senate voted 49-45 to advance the bill, short of the 60 yes votes needed in the 100-member Senate controlled by the Republicans. Both Republican and Democratic lawmakers continue to blame each other for the impasse. US President Donald Trump, meanwhile, said that his administration planned to produce a list on Friday of Democrat programs that will be closed as a result of the ongoing federal government shutdown. Speaking to reporters on Tuesday, Trump promised to use the shutdown as an opportunity to exert more leverage over federal spending.
The Democrats are getting killed on the shutdown because we're closing up programs that are Democrat programs that we were opposed to. So we're being able, and they're never going to come back in many cases. So we're being able to do things that we were unable to do before. So we're closing up programs that are Democrat programs that we wanted to close up or that we never wanted to happen, and now we're closing them up. And we're not going to let them come back.
So the number of US federal worker layoffs as a result of the government shutdown was revised downwards on Tuesday, suggesting that the Trump administration's initial statement about sweeping job cuts was too ambitious. The Trump administration has dismissed more than 4,100 employees since 1st of October, the day the US government shutdown began. The Justice Department last week, in a separate court filing, estimated the figure was at least 4,200. The president blamed the cuts on US government shutdown. The government is closed because Trump and lawmakers have failed to agree on a spending plan for federal agencies. Trump is trying to pressure the Democrats into accepting his spending plan by firing federal workers and cutting programs he says are favored by Democrats. Now, amid all this, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Tuesday said that the US economy may be on a firmer footing, but warns the job market remains fragile. Speaking at a business economics conference in Philadelphia, Powell described a growing tension. Economic growth appears stronger, yet hiring has stalled. With official data disrupted by the government shutdown, the Fed plans to decide on the future rate cuts meeting by meeting. Inflation remains above target, but weak employment raises new concerns. Powell emphasized that there is no risk-free path as the Federal Reserve balances inflation control with job protection.
The outlook for employment and inflation does not appear to have changed much since our September meeting 4 weeks ago. There is no risk-free path for policy as we navigate the tension between our employment and inflation goals. This challenge was evident in the dispersion of committee participants' projections at the September meeting. And I'll stress again that these projections should be understood as representing a range of potential outcomes whose probabilities evolve as new information informs our meeting-by-meeting approach to policymaking. We'll set policy based on the evolution of the economic outlook and the balance of risks rather than following a predetermined path.
Next, we have updates from West Asia. 3 of the 4 bodies of Israeli hostages in Gaza returned by Hamas late Tuesday have been identified. The families of the hostages posted statements on social media after Israel's forensic research laboratory confirmed the identities. The slain hostages were identified as 20-year-old Tamir Nimrodi, whose fate was unclear until his body was identified. 35-year-old Uriel Baruch, who was killed at the Nova Music Festival by Hamas on October 7th, and his body was kidnapped to Gaza. And the bodies returned include 53-year-old Etienne Levy, who was missing for over 2 months after the October 7th attack, before the Israeli army informed his family that he was dead and his remains were held by Hamas. The identity of a 4th body is yet to be confirmed. Hamas has so far released 20 living hostages and 8 bodies under the US-brokered Gaza peace deal, still keeping 20 bodies that Hamas has committed to handing over under the agreement. Meanwhile, aid trucks bound for Gaza were seen moving from Egypt's Rafah early on Wednesday, with several others lined up at the border area. According to Israel's public broadcaster, Israel will allow Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt to open on Wednesday and increase the amount of humanitarian aid coming into the enclave after Hamas handed over more bodies of deceased hostages. Under the agreement brokered by US President Donald Trump, Hamas was due to hand over all hostages, both living and dead, within 72 hours of the truce coming into effect last Friday. Further, the re-emergent Hamas fighters demonstrated that they were reasserting control in Gaza by deploying hundreds of security forces in the streets and executing several people they accused of collaborating with Israel. The outlook for Trump's peace plan darkened further when the president threatened Hamas with military strikes unless the militant group disarmed.
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games. Okay? Now, we did something monumental. We got the hostages back. That was the first thing we had to do. Above all else, get the hostages back. Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that.
On to East Africa now. I beg your pardon, let's first talk about France. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu will face the confidence votes known as censure votes on Thursday. Opposition parties on the far right and far left are demanding parliamentary elections. The Socialists said that they would be prepared to support the new government, but only if it promises a complete suspension of Macron's pension changes. Lecornu told Parliament on Tuesday that he backs suspending the controversial 2023 pension reforms, under which retirement age was proposed to be raised from 62 to 64. Lecornu was reappointed Prime Minister last week, only 4 days after he resigned, and needs the support of Socialist MPs in Parliament if his government is to survive. Next news from East Africa. The streets of Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo, were largely quiet on Wednesday as residents returned to their daily routines following weeks of protests that saw the ouster of President Andry Rajoelina and a military takeover of the government. President Rajoelina had refused to step down despite escalating Gen Z demonstrations demanding his resignation and widespread defections in the army. In a day of turmoil for the nation off southern Africa's coast, the 51-year-old leader, whose whereabouts are unknown, earlier on Tuesday sought to dissolve the lower house by decree. But lawmakers went ahead with a vote to impeach him, leaving the country in a constitutional deadlock, which the military seized upon to declare that they were taking charge. Rajoelina, who himself came to power in a coup in 2009, condemned the power grab by the military in a statement. The United States, on their part, urged all sides in Madagascar to find a peaceful solution that respects the constitution after an elite military unit took power in Madagascar. Under the US law, Washington is required to cut off aid to countries if it determines that military coups have taken place, although President Donald Trump's administration has already severely cut US assistance around the world. The United States provided around $32 million to Madagascar in the fiscal year that ended last month, led by health assistance, according to official US data. Brazil, India, Italy and Japan vowed on Tuesday to quadruple their production and consumption of renewable fuels, hoping that other countries will join the pledge during the UN climate talks in November. Brazilian Foreign Ministry official João Marcos Paes Leme said that he hopes to have a good number of signatories and other European countries are also interested. Paes Leme was speaking on the sidelines of a meeting of representatives from 67 countries in the run-up to COP30 climate talks in the Amazon city of Belém next month. The pledge involves quadrupling the production of sustainable fuels such as biofuels, hydrogen and some synthetic fuels by 2035 compared to 2024 levels. Paes Leme noted that these fuels can be used to replace planet-harming fossil fuels in sectors such as aviation, maritime transport or the cement and steel industries. India was elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council for the term 2026 to 2028 for the 7th time today. India is among the 14 countries elected to serve on the Geneva-based UN Human Rights Council. India, Angola, Egypt, Mauritius, South Africa, Iraq, Pakistan, Vietnam, Estonia, Slovenia, Chile, Ecuador, Italy, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland were elected to 3-year terms beginning January 1st. The 47-member council can discuss human rights issues and adopt non-binding resolutions on abuses when it chooses. India's permanent representative to the UN, P. Harish, thanked all delegations for their overwhelming support. In a social media post, he said, and I quote him here, "This election reflects India's unwavering commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms. We look forward to serve this objective during our tenure." You're watching DD India News Hour, still to come on the show. Donald Trump threatens to end cooking oil purchases from China as the trade war between the two biggest economies intensifies. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth begin NATO meeting to discuss arms initiative for Ukraine. And Indonesia raises its volcano emergency alert to its highest level after Mount Lewotobi Laki-Laki erupts.
Can the US launch a bombing campaign against Iran? The Philippines vessel suffered structural damage. The saga of child sexual abuse is the United States China's debt trap strategy. Truth is stranger than fiction. But sometimes hard to uncover. Trust us to tell the truth, unadulterated and pure, of every story that matters to you. You read between the lines, cut the clutter, and connect the dots to get you the full picture. Watch Connecting the Dots at these times with me, only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I am Tanvi Taneja. On to the US-China trade war. Both countries on Tuesday began charging additional port fees on ocean shipping firms that move everything from holiday toys to crude oil, making the high seas a key front in the trade war between the world's two largest economies. A return to an all-out trade war appeared imminent last week after China announced a major expansion of its rare earths export controls, and President Donald Trump threatened to raise tariffs on Chinese goods to triple digits. But after the weekend, both sides sought to reassure traders and investors, highlighting cooperation between their negotiating teams and the possibility they could find a way forward. China said it had started to collect the special charges on US-owned, operated, built or flagged vessels, but clarified that Chinese-built ships would be exempted from the levies. Similar to the US plan, the new China-imposed fees would be collected at the first port of entry on a single voyage or for the first 5 voyages within a year. Also, US President Donald Trump was considering terminating some trade ties with China, including in relation to cooking oil. China has sharply reduced US soybean purchases, which Trump has called a negotiation tactic. Trump said this month he hopes to discuss soybeans with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, while also warning that the US may halt a large share of imports from China. Back to Europe. NATO defense ministers gathered in Brussels on Wednesday for talks to discuss support for Ukraine and defending its border after multiple drone incursions across Europe. Ahead of the meeting, NATO chief Mark Rutte said that the session will focus on how to make our deterrence and defense even stronger, adding that the military alliance and the European Union were working together in their efforts to set up a drone wall to protect member countries from drone incursions. He also stated that EU and NATO had different roles, with NATO providing capabilities on the military side and the EU holding the soft power of the internal market and making sure that the money is there.
Touch on all those issues. And of course, on what happened just recently, the drones, how to make sure that we can do even more to protect NATO against also these new developments. So this will be an important day. I can assure you that the EU and NATO are really working very well together. There is no doubling at all. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, myself, the relevant commissioners, including Kubilius and of course Kaja Kallas and the others, we are all making sure that we make use of the strengths of the two organizations.
US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Wednesday said that commitments from NATO countries will translate into enhanced capabilities. Speaking in the Belgian capital of Brussels ahead of a defense ministers' meeting at NATO headquarters, Hegseth said the increase of firepower will benefit Ukraine through the prioritized Ukraine requirements list program, which has been developed by the US and allies to supply Ukraine with new weapons.
Mark mentioned it, firepower. That's what is coming, we expect, and is coming from NATO. And it was a historic summit just a couple of months ago, brought about by leadership of President Trump to say we need our allies to step up. And they did, and they have, in those commitments. Now those commitments will soon translate into capabilities, which is the most important aspect of it. And one part of that, of course, is Pearl, is the initiative where European countries buy U.S. weapons transferred to NATO for the fight in Ukraine to bring peace to that conflict. And if there's anything we've learned under President Trump, is the active application of peace through strength.
The European Union has often been criticized for burdening companies with too much bureaucracy. Now, the committee in Brussels is trying to cut down on some regulations. Up first, the supply chain law. Lars Holte is with Deutsche Welle and joins me from Berlin. Lars, what are you hearing from Brussels?
Thanks for having me. Yes, the EU Commission's Committee on Legal Affairs is out with some recommendations on that supply chain law, and they come pretty close to what the corporate community has been asking for. Now, to explain what we're talking about here, the EU's supply chain law is an important piece of legislation in many ways. It is in place to make sure that companies keep their supply chains clean by, for example, not allowing their suppliers to employ child labor or use slavery, or generally have unsafe or inhumane working conditions. Also, by forcing their suppliers to adhere to certain environmental standards, clean air, clean water and such. So all this is, of course, very important. But the problem was, while companies agreed to these standards in general, of course, they had a hard time documenting everything.
And what changes are being proposed now, Lars?
It's mostly about the documentation of supply chains. See, the problem has always been for the past few years, and basically for as long as the law had been in the making, the problem was that documentation is very costly. It takes a lot of effort for companies to follow their supply chains all the way to the raw materials and document things to the standard the EU had wanted to see. Especially small and medium-sized companies often said they would have to set up an entire new department to tackle the job, and that would have been cost prohibitive and definitely a competitive disadvantage in a world where companies outside the EU, let's look at Asia for example, already benefit from sometimes more lax regulation and mostly also a lower cost structure. So now the EU Legal Commission says that only companies of more than 5,000 employees and with revenues of more than 1.5 billion euros have to document their supply chain in detail. For Germany, that means that only 120 companies for now have to abide by the very strict rules of documentation instead of the almost 3,000 that had originally been targeted.
Lars, so what are the reactions to these changes? Is everybody happy now?
No, of course not. Here's the thing. The business community is pretty happy. Like I said, they had been asking for changes for a while and is often run under the banner of too much regulation, too much bureaucracy. But of course, there is also a downside. The regulation, tight as it was supposed to protect the poorest in the world, those who might be victims of forced labor, child labor. Now, of course, these forms of supply chain work are still not allowed, and they're not even wanted by any company out there. But if there are fewer controls, or if fewer companies have to document that they are doing a rigorous job checking out the details of their supply chains, then the higher the chance is that those that are at fault won't be found out. And that is something that some NGOs are now pointing out. The interest of the poorest has now been weakened to support the industry. However, of course, driven by economic needs. After all, the EU needs to be competitive with other international markets. Driven by those needs, the Commission didn't really have much of a choice than to loosen its regulations a bit.
Thank you, Lars, for all those updates. Lars Holte reporting from DW Berlin. On to Ecuador now, where a vehicle exploded outside a shopping mall in their largest city, Guayaquil, killing one person and injuring several others, the country's prosecutor office said on Wednesday. Interior Minister John Reinberg said that a second vehicle containing explosives was found nearby but did not detonate and was immediately neutralized, adding that police were carrying out controlled detonations and collecting evidence. Authorities urged residents to stay away from the area while investigations continued. Guayaquil is one of the most violent cities in Ecuador. Last week, President Daniel Noboa's car was attacked by protesters with rocks cracking windows as the vehicle sped past. Authorities in Indonesia have raised the volcano emergency alert to its highest level after Mount Levotobi Laki-Laki erupted on Wednesday. The roofs of houses in the village of Hikong in East Nusa Tenggara were blanketed by a layer of ash, sand and gravel after a tower of volcanic ash shot 10 kilometers into the sky. There were no immediate reports of casualties or damage on Wednesday, but authorities have warned residents and tourists on the eastern Indonesian island of Flores to keep away from the mountain and prepare for possible evacuation. The volcano last erupted in August. It also erupted in July, causing flight disruptions to and from the nearby resort island of Bali. More from Asia. As per Afghanistan officials, more than 12 civilians were killed in the country as fresh fighting broke out between Afghan and Pakistani forces on Wednesday. Afghan spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said on X that early Wednesday morning, Pakistani forces launched attacks, killing more than 12 civilians and over 100 others were wounded. Afghan spokesperson also claimed that in a retaliatory move, Afghan forces killed a large number of Pakistani soldiers, captured their posts and centers, seized their weapons and tanks, and destroyed most of their military facilities. The neighbors have closed several crossings along their border in its aftermath, bringing trade to a halt and leaving scores of loaded goods vehicles stranded on both sides. And in some sad news now, Raila Odinga, the former Prime Minister of Kenya, passed away at the age of 80. As per reports, Odinga suffered a cardiac arrest on Wednesday. The former Kenyan Prime Minister was the perennial opposition figure of Kenyan politics and lost all 5 of his presidential campaigns. His work as a democracy activist over the years helped seal 2 of the country's most important reforms. Prime Minister Narendra Modi expressed grief over the demise of former Kenyan Prime Minister. In a post on X, Prime Minister Modi wrote, and I quote him here, "Deeply saddened by the passing of my dear friend and former Prime Minister of Kenya, Mr. Raila Odinga. He was a towering statesman and a cherished friend of India. I had the privilege of knowing him closely since my days as Chief Minister of Gujarat, and our association continued over the years. He had a special affection for India, our culture, values and ancient wisdom. This was reflected in his efforts to strengthen India-Kenya ties. He particularly admired Ayurveda and traditional medicine systems of India, having witnessed their positive impact on his daughter's health. I extend my deepest condolences to his family and friends and to the people of Kenya in this hour of grief." Unquote. You're watching DD India News Hour, still to come on the show. India progresses rapidly in rail coach manufacturing, says Minister Ashwini Vaishnav at the International Railway Equipment Exhibition in New Delhi. Supreme Court of India allows sale, use of green firecrackers in Delhi NCR region during Diwali, but the move comes with conditions. Thousands of Russian devotees throng to see the sacred Buddha relics sent by India to Kalmakia.
There's so many invaluable artifacts that the British have taken from our country. They robbed us of our self-respect. They robbed us of our honor. Loot was never innocent. It was painful.
The word loot, that was stolen from India too.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Tanvi Taneja. A reminder of the headlines we're tracking at this hour. IMF revises India's GDP growth forecast upwards to 6.6% from 6.4% for 2025-26 fiscal. Despite Trump's tariff pressure, it is the highest figure in developing economies. US government shutdown enters its third week as Senate rejects Republican funding bill for the 8th time. US Fed chair flags concern about sharp slowdown in job creation. 608 trucks to enter Gaza today with key Rafah crossing set to reopen. Bodies of 4 more Israeli hostages returned by Hamas. And tested by Russia, NATO looks to strengthen its defences. Secretary General Mark Rutte says the alliance and the EU are working together on a drone wall to protect Europe. So the International Monetary Fund in its latest report revised India's GDP growth forecast for 2025-26 fiscal upwards to 6.6% from 6.4% in its previous economic outlook. The October outlook increased India's growth projections by 20 basis points, reflecting a strong first quarter carryover. The IMF has highlighted that India has recorded the strongest upside surprise among all emerging market and developing economies. And we have with us now Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Senior Economic Journalist from India. Welcome, Shubhamoy, to DD India News Hour. First, your opening words on the IMF raising its GDP growth forecast for India for this fiscal. What does it say about the state of the Indian economy?
You know what? It is not very surprising because if you have to juxtapose this against what the RBI is saying. The data center which we should be looking most closely at is the Reserve Bank of India. While the IMF is a global, global analyst, it looks at all the world's economies, but its data is never as sophisticated as the data which the Reserve Bank of India has about the Indian economy naturally. Because of this, I put more emphasis on the Reserve Bank's projections. And the fact that the Reserve Bank has projected the Indian economy to be 7% is exactly what one expects, and that is where one would be looking at. So if you look at it, that now it's saying the IMF World Economic Outlook released on Tuesday says the Indian economy growth will be 6.6%. I would still say that that is still a lower than what the RBI projection is. And I would think that in the coming months, these numbers will be revised even upwards.
Okay. US tariffs were expected to hit the Indian economy and indeed the global economy. That has not happened so far. Could you shed some light on that?
You see, the US tariffs impact will be seen at the end of the year in terms of the actual realized tariff. Right now, there is far more of noise about the tariffs rather than the impact of the tariffs. So those are good for making optics. In fact, President Trump had used it basically to create an optical pressure. But the Indian economy, how it will respond, what will be the final numbers will come through only after several months when we get to see how our exports are doing. For instance, our exports to USA, like it has come down from the higher level, but it's still positive for the latest reported data, which has been released today. So, in fact, it's about 7% growth rate. So what does it show? It shows that the tariff impact is more something which is there in the news rather than on the impact on the ground. The data is also showing that these numbers are not, the tariff numbers are something which are there, as I said, as a bargaining tool, as a chip for in the context of the India-US trade negotiations. But they will not be so significant as to actually hurt India very substantially. Yes.
Okay. What do you think of the specific initiatives taken by the Indian government to protect the Indian economy from the tariffs imposed by the US?
Which is what you've seen, that the Indian government, in fact, I quote the finance minister said that we need to see data about what is going to happen. The government is thoroughly cognizant of what is happening in terms of the trade numbers, in terms of other data that's coming along. But as of now, the Indian government is right in saying that there's no cause for alarm immediately. We'll have to see how the different sectors pan out. Yes, there will be some sectors on which, sure, there'll be a bit more disproportionate impact. But as the growth numbers are clearly showing, that the impact on the growth rate, impact on overall across the economy is not as substantial as it was being feared. And that is bearing out what the government's point of view is.
Okay, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva has also praised India's economic and structural modifications. Would you like to add to the steps taken by the Indian government in recent years that have boosted economic growth and made the Indian economy more resilient?
Largely, those are the points, that largely what has happened is that we are getting the benefit of the steps taken in the past several years. What are these steps? One of the first steps that has been taken is the raising of the capital expenditure. The Indian capital expenditure now, as the percentage of the GDP of the government's budget, of the total GDP, has gone upward above 3%. In terms of the government spending, this is now well above 25% of the government spending. Now, these are substantial numbers, and that has been happening over several years, which is what is impacting in a positive way, the government's growth, the growth rate of the economy. Now, if somebody says, then what about the GST, the revision in the GST? Well, my point is that the GST benefit will now start showing in the numbers ahead. So that's why I'm saying that the RBI's projection, which takes into account what will be the impact of the GST through the year, is more robust compared to what the IMF has said. And we shall get to see that over the succeeding months.
Okay, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva also said that India has become essential to worldwide economic expansion. A word on that amazing development.
No, we are not a small economy now. So we shouldn't be looking at these statements as something that's, like surprises us. We are the world's fourth largest economy. Obviously, what India will do, the steps it will take will be very substantial compared to what the world is happening. So these are nothing to be amazed at, that why is IMF saying so. IMF is just recognizing the fact that India is such a big economy, and the fact that India is a big economy is something that in Doordarshan News and several times we have talked about. It's above 4 trillion, going on to expect to be something like 7 trillion by 2028. Now, these are numbers which obviously mean that they have a very strong bearing on the rest of the world. And as you can see, the decisions by the cabinet about new projects and others which have been taken on. For instance, the 65,000 crore rupee support that is being given for shipbuilding. So those will have very strong impact on global trade, finance, and every sort of thing. So that's expected. And this is a very big economy. So obviously its imprint on the government, on the world, will be very substantial, no doubt about it.
Okay, India is now growing significantly faster even than China. Your comments on that?
India has now got on to a growth rate which you will see getting better and better over the years. We should not be comparing our growth rate with other countries, because it is expected that India will be not only remain as the strongest growing economy, but is also the strongest growing major economy. Small economy growing at the rate of 6% or 7% has a very limited impact on the global growth rate. But this, as I said, is a very large economy. It has, therefore, the ability to impact not only its own economy, but also everybody with whom it trades with, which is why you see that the UK has signed an FTA deal with us. The EU is pushing for signing the FTA deal. And it's quite possible that India and USA will also have an FTA, there is a free trade agreement deal soon. Why is this happening? Because it's something which is, it's not, I mean, India should not be looked at as like, waiting for presence or praise from the global society. It is on its own, it is such a very, very major piece of the world economy, which actually will be deciding on which way the world progresses.
Okay, yes. On that note, we thank you, Shubhamoy, for being with us and sharing your analysis on the subject of India's growth trajectory. All right, let's move on now. Brazilian Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, along with Defence Minister José Múcio Monteiro Filho, will arrive in India in the afternoon on a 3-day visit. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh will hold a meeting with the visiting leaders. In a statement, the Defence Ministry said that the leaders will review the entire range of multifaceted relations in the field of defence between the two countries. The leaders will also exchange views on areas of mutual interest, covering military-to-military and defence industrial cooperation. Trade and economic relations are expected to be a major focus of the Vice President's visit. Both India and Brazil are currently facing higher US tariffs, prompting efforts to strengthen bilateral trade and reduce dependence on external markets. Economic engagement between India and Brazil has grown steadily. During Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to Brazil in July, the two leaders set a goal to raise bilateral trade to $20 billion within 5 years. In fact, in fiscal year 2024-25, merchandise trade between the two nations reached $12.19 billion, making Brazil India's largest trading partner in Latin America and the Caribbean. And our correspondent Akshay Dongre joins us on the story now. Hi Akshay, as we spoke about just now, Brazil is India's largest trading partner in South America and the Caribbean. So with Trump's tariff sword hanging over both India and Brazil, what can both countries be looking for in terms of revising their trade targets?
Well, both the countries are major global south economies. They're part of BRICS. They're part of several other multilateral forums as well, including the G20. Both Brazil and India share same kind of concerns as far as the monopolistic tendencies are concerned of the major economies of the world. Both the countries share equal amount of concern as far as the problems of freedom of trade is concerned, freedom of navigation is concerned in their respective seas, and they also have a huge stake as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned, especially when it comes to freedom of trade and freedom of navigation in these waters that are now seeing increasing amount of tensions. India started during its G20 presidency in a major manner, bringing together the global south countries, and that is a vision even Brazil shares with India. Both countries are major rising economies, and as you have rightly mentioned, they have set a target of about $20 billion annual trade growth in the next 5 years. That is quite achievable. In fact, both the countries are looking now to crossing that estimated figure that was targeted earlier, and that is perhaps the reason why both the countries are enhancing their engagements as well as bilateral ties. Next year, President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, will be coming to India. There are mechanisms in place between India and Brazil to hold annual summits to intensify trade, to intensify relations in different other arenas as well, including healthcare, in pharma sector, in education, in defense as well. And with the negotiation taking place, or with the discussions that are set to take place at the defense ministers level, we can expect not only defense ties to strengthen, but also both the countries to conduct multilateral and take part in bilateral military exercises as well. That is an arena both the countries are looking at expanding as well. So it's a good news for both the countries that the two major economies of the global south are looking at each other and are trying to enhance ties that can also ensure that India's ties with other countries in South America also strengthens in the years to come. So this is quite an interesting visit, quite an eventful visit as well, and hopes are high that it is going to be a milestone as far as the ties between the two countries are concerned.
Okay, thank you very much, Akshay Dongre, reporting from the newsroom. India's Minister for Railways, Ashwini Vaishnav, addressed the International Railway Equipment Exhibition in New Delhi on October 15th. The minister spoke about the progress made in rail coach manufacturing and the new trains started since the last 10 years.
Today, we have 35,000 kilometers of tracks built in the last 11 years, 46,000 kilometers of railway tracks electrified in the last 11 years. Phenomenal number. 40,000 new coaches manufactured. First bullet train project is now 325 kilometers done. We have now 156 Vande Bharat services, 30 Amrit Bharat services, and 4 Namo Bharat services, which are highly popular in the entire country. Our production levels have really gone up. Today, we are manufacturing 7,000 coaches every year, which is probably more than the many continents. We are manufacturing 1,681 locomotives, which is more than the complete production of Europe, North and South America, Africa and Australia combined. So that kind of work is going on in our country at this point of time.
The Railway Minister also shared details about the new projects which will go a long way in making travel easier and convenient for the commuters.
Many new projects which have now become reality. Chenab Bridge, which is world's highest bridge, highest railway arch bridge, that's a reality now, and it's giving a lot of good service to the people of Kashmir Valley. The railway line to Mizoram was recently inaugurated by Honorable Prime Minister. It has fundamentally changed the way people get their goods, the cost of commodity transportation. Everything has fundamentally changed because of these projects. Pamban Bridge, another very important technology milestone that has been achieved recently. And Kavach implementation is going on at a very rapid pace.
More news from India. The Supreme Court has relaxed firecracker ban conditions in Delhi NCR region ahead of the festival of Diwali and allowed bursting of green firecrackers from October 18th to October 21st. Bursting of green firecrackers will be allowed from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. on Diwali and again from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. in the evening. The Apex Court said that it has to take a balanced approach, permitting bursting of green firecrackers in moderation while not compromising with the environment. The court ordered police authority to constitute patrolling team to keep an eye that only permits products with QR codes to be sold, while no firecrackers will be allowed in the Delhi NCR region from the outside. In a strict action, the top court ordered that if fake firecrackers are found, the license should be suspended. Indeed, India's Vikas Sarthi joins us from Delhi now. Vikas, first, please help us understand, do green crackers actually make a difference in reducing air pollution? Are they really a cleaner, healthier and safer choice?
Right, Tanvi, they are considered better than the conventional crackers, though Supreme Court doesn't have any particular data or specific data to ascertain whether these green crackers are better than conventional crackers, but it is assumed that since harmful materials are being avoided in these green crackers, so the pollution levels are lesser than those conventional crackers. And because of that, Supreme Court is also of the opinion that except the COVID period, whenever these bans have been followed throughout the Diwali, the results were very minimal. And in fact, because of that fact, Supreme Court has asked states to collect the data from 14th October to 25th October and submit it to the Supreme Court. Then Supreme Court will be able to know whether this kind of a position works or not. As far as this order is concerned, Supreme Court was of the opinion that there should be a balance. The previous order has completely banned any kind of crackers, whether those were green crackers or conventional crackers, all have been banned by the Supreme Court. And CJI, B.R. Gavai, said that that measure seems counterproductive because we saw that those old crackers were smuggled into Delhi NCR and there was no control of prohibiting use of those conventional crackers. So this time Supreme Court has given a nod on experimental basis. What will be the result? How these green crackers will affect air quality index of Delhi NCR, we will be able to know at a later stage. But court was of the opinion that this time around we should allow crackers on 2 days, Diwali and a day before Diwali, for a particular time period, in the morning from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. and in the night from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So crackers have been allowed for only for 2 days for Diwali and a day before Diwali.
Okay, Vikas, let's be realistic here. We know that on the night of Diwali, crackers keep, they are being burnt right until 2 to 3 a.m. as well. So implementation still remains a major concern. So despite these Supreme Court guidelines, fake or non-certified crackers can also reach consumers. So they can be disguised with green labels. So taking these two aspects, what should consumers be looking for, A, while buying these green crackers, and B, for the administration to make sure that the time limit is adhered to?
Right. So it is the responsibility of the administration to ensure that only green crackers will be sold. The court has said that that these crackers will be sold at particular points. It is not that these will be available for all shops or all shopkeepers. These will be sold from particular points, and it will be the responsibility of the local administration to ensure, first, that only green crackers will be sold, and two, that any kind of illegal crackers should not be smuggled into Delhi NCR. Apart from it, we may see kind of impact because of this particular order. What we have seen in the past, that when these crackers were smuggled into Delhi NCR, they were sold at a very higher prices. Now the green crackers have been allowed, so there will be a competition among the green cracker sellers and those people who try to smuggle conventional crackers or old stock of crackers into Delhi NCR. So that also will be counterproductive for them. Specific points will be identified by the local administration. Court has also directed state governments to form different teams which will keep inquiring about about the sales of green crackers, and apart from it, NIRI, which is a wing of CSRI, and PESO, which allows the sellers and cracker producers to adhere with the guidelines which have been given by NIRI. So these two agencies have given particular certificates to firecrackers manufacturers and sellers. That will be ensured by a QR code. So administrative teams which will be formed after Supreme Court's direction, they will be able to know through that QR code whether this particular stock is a stock of green cracker, or they are trying to misguide people or administrative wings and trying to sell out all those old stock or conventional crackers. So some measures have been adopted by the Supreme Court to ensure that the impact of these green crackers should be minimum. Because of that, only 3 hours in a particular day have been given, 1 hour in the morning and 2 hours in the night. And apart from it, several teams will be formed to ensure that only green crackers will be sold through proper agents, proper shopkeepers at particular points or at particular shops. Sandeep.
Okay, thank you very much, Vikas Sarthi, for all those details. Meanwhile, to avert air pollution across Delhi NCR with the advent of cold weather, the Commission for Air Quality Management has activated the first stage of the Graded Response Action Plan. The move comes amid forecasts from the India Meteorological Department, the IITM, predicting that pollution levels are likely to remain in the same category over the coming days. The committee has directed all concerned agencies in the NCR to implement, monitor and review the Stage 1 measures immediately to prevent further deterioration of air quality. A 27-point action plan as per Stage 1 of GRAP is applicable with immediate effect in the entire National Capital Region. Several measures have been put in place to control dust and limit emissions. Thorough checks on polluting vehicles, better traffic management and emission controls in industries, power plants and brick kilns will be ensured, and regular lifting and proper disposal of industrial waste from industrial and non-development areas will be ensured. Strict vigil to ensure that there are no burning incidents in the landfill sites and dump sites, and diesel generator sets are not to be used as regular source of power supply. Vehicles causing pollution may be fined or impounded. Traffic control measures include deployment of police at major intersections with the instruction for drivers to switch off engines at red lights. Strict enforcement of these orders by the Supreme Court on overage diesel petrol vehicles will also be ensured. So Moving on to Russia now to give a new cultural dimension to India-Russia ties. The sacred relics of Buddha have been brought to the Russian Republic of Kalmykia. In an event of profound spiritual and cultural significance, the holy relics were formally enshrined in Kalmykia. Thousands of devotees are thronging to see these ancient relics. Our correspondent Manju Meena reports from Elista.
Kalmykia is the only republic in Russia that is considered unique even in Europe, where Buddhists are in the majority. On a special request from Governor of Kalmykia, the Indian high-level delegation arrived in Elista on 11th of October with the sacred relics of Buddha. The sacred relics are enshrined for public veneration at the main Buddhist monastery in Elista.
Kalmykia राज्य के विश्वविद्यालय के अंदर वहाँ के सारे वाइस चांसलर से लेकर के प्रोफेसर से लेकर के स्टूडेंट तक सब एक साथ वहाँ पर बैठ करके सुन रहे हैं और ध्यान से सुन रहे हैं जब हम वहाँ कंगूर भेंट करने का काम कर रहे हैं। और जिस श्रद्धा भाव से उन्होंने कंगूर को ग्रहण करने का काम किया है वह भाव बहुत मुझे अच्छा लगा है और बहुत ही श्रद्धा से भरा रहा है और उनकी आस्था निश्चित तौर से अभिनंदनीय है। और रूस के प्रत्येक नागरिक को भी और भारत के भी प्रत्येक नागरिक को और दुनिया के भी जो लोग हैं उनको भी भगवान बुद्ध की शरण में आना चाहिए।
Along with the sacred relics, the kangyurs have also been brought from India, which have been gifted by the Indian government to the Kalmykian Buddhist temples known as kuruls here, as well as to the Kalmykian University and Museum.
छोटे छोटे शहर जैसे एक एलिस्टा हो गया, काल्मिकिया हो गया, बुरियातिया हो गया, बुद्धिस्ट जो ऑटोनोमस रिपब्लिक्स है, इनको भी यहाँ भी अगर लोग आके देखें तो आश्चर्यजनक स्थिति है। मतलब इतना सुंदर है कि वो कहना बड़ा मुश्किल है।
The holy relics are accompanied by a high-level delegation of senior Indian monks who are conducting blessings and religious services for the local devotees. Various events were organized for the Indian delegation, which was accorded warm welcome by the local community at various places. The exposition of the holy relics of Lord Buddha and Kalmykia is a landmark event that represents a historic homecoming of faith for the Kalmyk people. It stands as a powerful bridge of spiritual friendship between India and Russia, showcasing India's cultural diplomacy and the unifying power of the Buddha's teachings. Manju Meena's report from Elista for DD India.
That's all for this edition of DD India News Hour. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.